Memorable Dogman Encounter by Fave So this one is hard to remember, as my mind could be better at remembering things. To clarify, I live in Brazil, specifically in the countryside of Rio Grande do Sul, and while my belief in the supernatural is almost non-existent, I can swear to God that what I saw to this day was real. Also, I'm sorry for any English mistakes since it is not my first language. So as I said, I live in the countryside. Our rural town making frontier to the big city down the road takes quite a bit. I'm a devoted Christian, but my autism does not allow me to stay too long at the church, as I'm too imperative to sit down and listen to it. So, most of the time, I tend to leave the church early. This was another day I had to go, and I had to leave early. This area of the street had no asphalt. It was all dirt. Walking back home, listening to music on my phone, I suddenly stopped and looked at a nearby tree. It was hard to describe what I saw due to the insufficient lighting as the sun was setting, but from the shapes of the branches, I could see a black, humanoid figure with red eyes and black horns. Although I don't think it noticed me, I started to run, and then I looked behind me to be sure that this thing was not chasing me. The moment I looked back, however, there was something else on the street. It was a dog. A really big dog. Its fur was black as the darkness itself. Its eyes were bloodshot red. The thing just sat down on the road, looking at me. I kept running, but the dog never seemed to follow me, but it still stared at me with those deep red eyes. Despite the running and having to walk on foot, I got home quickly and wasn't too terribly far from the church. It's weird, but I noticed how everything seemed too quiet while the dog was there. Usually things are still going on in the neighborhood, but it was as if everyone decided to hide away. For context, my home is in a hill-like area with 3 other houses. The first one is my grandmother, and then you go up a slight bump in the road until you reach my home. Up on the back is where my grandparents used to live. The gate for this house is now down there, so you must shout to get their attention to open it. My grandmother wasn't home at the time, so I kept playing on my computer until my parents were finally back home. Everything went okay until I suddenly heard something from outside. A voice coming from out there, in a calming, yet creepy manner. It almost sounded like a hoarse whisper, like somebody saying,
"Hey, open the door."
It freaked me out so bad. So I just hid in my room and waited for my grandparents to get home, and I didn't say anything to anybody about it ever until I shared this story with you. Something Hides in the Hills of Texas by John. Howdy, I'm John from Texas. I won't say where for privacy reasons, but I live 10 miles away from my friend Willie's house. He has a lot of acres of land and rides a lot of horses. I live in the suburbs, so I'm going to the country and riding with him, and I'm doing that fairly often, and I enjoy it. I'm 17, and he's 19, and we always make jokes like, "Don't pull the reins too hard, boy," to where I always reply, "I'm 2 goddamn years younger than you, Will." But we never really take it to heart, and it's always just been good fun between brothers. We aren't kin, but he's like my older brother. In the autumn of 2018, when I was 13 and he was 15, we rode one day and planned on staying the night in the prairie about a mile or 2 away from the house. I got on a 6-year-old white stud named Jesse, and Willie got on a 3-year-old brown horse named James. Yes, his parents named those horses after the famous outlaw Jesse and James. Weird, but who am I to judge? Anyway, we set out on our ride at dawn. I say dawn because we did not care about what time it actually was. We were ready to ride the prairies, the woods, and rolling hills of rural Texas to our heart's content. As we rode on for hours and hours, we did nothing but joke around and sing dumb old cowboy songs Willie had learned from his grandfather. In the case of coyotes and snakes, Willie had a revolver on his hip, and I brought along my .30-30 rifle. All we needed were pocket knives, but I don't think we had any spare ones besides the one that was special to us, but I had it on me anyway, but I didn't really want to use it. A friend who used to live in my neighborhood who was Native American gave it to me as a gift of thanks for keeping his bully off his back. I never asked what tribe he was from, though, but I sharpen the knife daily, and it's super sharp, so if needed, it'll get the job done. When I first started growing my facial hair, I would use it to shave it, I don't know why, but it resulted in a nasty cut one day. But it's worth it for me, a 13-year-old at the time, to feel manly. Speaking of feeling manly, Willie and I found a small lake to swim in. The only problem was that it was cold as ice. So we dared each other to cannonball right into the freezing lake water. Boys will be boys, I guess. We stripped down to our boxers and jumped in. It was so much fun to feel the freezing water all over me in a hot summer's day. Willie and I splashed around until 3 men rode up on horseback. They were a couple of years older than us, give or take. They dressed like we were, in cowboy hats, flannel shirts, cowboy boots, and bandanas around their necks. The one in the middle, who appeared to be the youngest, leaned on his saddle horn and stared daggers at us with his bright blue eyes. He spoke.
"What are you boys doing in these parts, huh?"
Willie answered back, Swimming? Who the hell do you think you are? The guy was laughing, and he drew his revolver on his side, pointing it at us. The other 2 guys followed his lead.
"How about y'all get your delicate asses out of that water and put your clothes back on,"
he said, aiming it at us with a steady hand. We got out, put our clothes back on, even though we were soaking wet. Willie dropped the revolver on his hip, and I dropped my pocket knife. Then we put our hands up. What do you want? I asked him.
"I'll tell you what the hell I want, boy. I want you off my goddamn property. Me and my posse are staying here a spell, so you best get out of here,"
he said with a grin, but at the same time super aggressively. Me and Willie both agreed to leave, but we couldn't have honestly made up this crazy, hostile, J-head out of nowhere. Like, there's no way this guy had suddenly come and commandeered this area. We rode for another mile or 2 before we called the police, or at least tried to, because the signal was absolutely awful. With no way to call the cops and barely being able to connect to a tower, we decided to deal with them ourselves. So we rode into the prairie, set up camp, and waited. I had my 30-30, and Willie had his revolver ready. 10 riders rolled up to us an hour after sunset, kicking up dust. They all had their guns drawn, and they all glared at us with the desire to put us out of our misery right then and there. All of them but one, the same smiling J-head that pointed his gun at us earlier. There was something off about him. Even though he didn't look crazy, he was not all there mentally. They walked past our fire toward us, pistol drawn and ready to blow our heads off. Willie and myself had no idea what we were going to do or why this was even happening. The crazy guy got about a foot away from me and looked right at me. The crazy guy got about a foot away from me and looked me right in my eyes and said,
"I don't think we personally met, partner. I'm Billy."
He put his gun away and stuck his hand out to shake mine. I shook his hand and told him my name was John.
"John, huh? A mighty fine name."
Billy looked over at Willie.
"You got a name, amigo?"
"My name's Willie," Willie said in a stern voice.
"Well, John, Willie, I want y'all to know I don't mean no harm, but I best not see you in this spot again. You understand?"
Billy stared at us, if expecting us to say we would leave. But Willie pointed to his pistol, and Billy also then began to yell,
"You can kiss my ass. This is my property, my parents, my probability. You must leave right now before I..."
It was cut off by the sound of a gun hammer being clicked. All the riders had their guns aimed at me and Willie. Billy grabbed Willie by his shirt collar and put his gun under his chin.
"You leave now, boy, or I'll blow your goddamn head off,"
he said to Willie. Billy got back on his horse, and then he and his men rode off. We got back on our horses and rode back to the house to use the landline to call the police and warn Willie's parents about the crazy horse riders on their property. When we told them what had happened, they didn't believe us in the slightest and wanted to search the whole property before calling the cops. Sure enough, we couldn't find evidence of anybody other than Willie and me ever being there. When I started thinking all about the guys who were riding the horses, they dressed like cowboys and were led by a young guy named Billy. So, after some talking and some digging, we are in a historical area where Billy the Kid would have been running around. So no freaking way. Did we have a ghostly encounter with Billy the Kid and his crew? How were we able to travel in time like that? Could it have been something to do with that special pocket knife? I don't know. That's never happened to me before. But it was terrifying and exciting, all at the same time. Rachel, Mindy, and Nathan were excited to finish their freshman year of college. They decided to take a road trip to an old campground that is known for its beautiful scenery. It is well off the beaten path, but so is anything else worth seeing. Nathan was driving as they turned off the main road. "Well, say goodbye to civilization," Nathan said. I know. Isn't this awesome? Finally, no more assignments for a while, Mindy answered. Right, Rachel? Mindy turned to see Rachel fast asleep in the back seat. I guess being on the dean's list is tiring, Nathan laughingly said. Mindy was staring out the window as it got quiet. As they drove deeper into the country, Mindy noticed the old house off in the distance. Well, I didn't think anyone lived out here, Mindy said quietly. They don't, Nathan replied. There's a house right there. Looks creepy though, Mindy said. That's because it is, Nathan replied. What do you mean? Mindy asked. Off this old highway a few hundred yards down a dirt driveway, people who live around here know to stay away. The house has a bad history. Everyone has seen it. Everyone and anyone who has crossed the path from going from point A to point B has looked to the side at night and seen that lonely dark house riding by itself. Although over the years it has gotten a fair amount of attention, said Nathan. What kind of bad history? Mindy asked. Nathan turned and looked at Mindy in her eyes and said with a seductive smile, Do you really want to know? Mindy laughed and answered back, I sure do. Nathan sat back and took a deep breath. I did a little research. In 1924, a family lived there. Apparently the father fell on hard times and went absolutely crazy. He killed his family, then brought their bones into the cellar with a shovel, and, nobody ever saw them again. Or him. So, he just closed the cellar door, and that was it, Mindy said. Yes, with a shovel. God knows what he did down there, said Nathan. It was getting dark, and Mindy looked at the house as Nathan pulled over to use the bathroom. The setting sun cast an eerie light on the backdrop of the house. As Nathan got back and Misty looked at him, and as Nathan reached for the ignition, Mindy stopped him. No, I want to see it, Mindy said. Nathan looked back at Rachel to see that she was still sleeping. Let's do it, Nathan said, as he reached for Mindy. Mindy pushed him away. No, I'm serious. I want to see the house. The inside of it. I want to see what happened, Mindy said as she looked into his eyes worriedly. Nathan could not believe it. You're serious? You want to see what's inside? He asked. Yes, Mindy said, as she held his arm. Nathan looked down at her and back up at her. Then Nathan looked at his watch and over at the house. Okay, let's wake up Rachel. Mindy woke Rachel up and told her that they were going to do something awesome, as Nathan got the backpacks ready to be carried. Mindy told Rachel she could stay in the van if she wanted to, and Rachel tried to talk her out of it. Are you crazy? Why do you want to go see it? Mindy told her she had to know what happened. Why don't you just, go look for police records or something? Besides, that was 100 years ago. What if there's some crazy person in there? Mindy rolled her eyes and began walking down the driveway as Nathan caught up with her. Rachel looked around as it was turning into night and hurried to catch up with them. As they got to the house, a loud thud came from inside. See? There's someone in there. They know we're here, Rachel said. It's an old house, probably rotting wood falling, Nathan said as he turned to Mindy and smiled. They reached the front door. As Nathan tried the knob, to their surprise, the door opened. It was dark and dusty. They couldn't see anything, so Nathan used his flashlight from his camping gear. They walked around examining things. Kids' toys, baby clothes, a straw hat, a tobacco pipe. Looks like they just up and left, Nathan said. I guess nobody bothered to try to clean up. They just let it all sit in here until the house collapses, huh? Yeah, well, they probably figured nobody would come in here, Rachel snapped. Let's stay together, Nathan said as they made their way to the back of the house. When they made it to the back room, there was another thud. Okay, guys, seriously, let's get out of here. That wasn't falling wood. Rachel turned to Nathan. Nathan, please, let's go. Make Mindy come on. Rachel pleaded. Nathan looked at her and then looked down at the ground. He looked up again. You're right. This is not our business. We shouldn't be here, he said. Rachel let out a sigh of relief, but just as she thought she had won, Mindy found something. Hey guys, look, the cellar. Let's go down there and see what the father did. Maybe we will find something that was left behind, Mindy said in a trance-like voice. Earth to Mindy, hello. No, we're not going into the cellar, okay? Rachel argued. If you're so scared, you can go back to the van, Mindy snapped. Rachel took her up on that offer and hurried back to the van. "I'll wait in the van, but don't take forever," she spoke. Mindy assured her that they would be out soon. Mindy and Nathan looked at the cellar door and then at each other. Nathan slowly reached for the door and pushed it open. A dark stairway led to an area that was pitch black. Nathan shined his light down and they slowly took it step by step until they were at the bottom. Mindy grabbed Nathan by the arm as he shone his light around. "There's a shovel," he spoke. "I bet that's the same one the father used to bury his family down here. But where is he?" They slowly walked around, shining the flashlight around as it revealed more clues. Nathan shined his light on the mound of dirt. "Look, Mindy, I bet these mounds are where he buried them," he spoke. Mindy covered her mouth with her hand as she walked around the mound. "Look, Nathan, a mound, but it looks unfinished. Where's all the dirt?" Mindy said confusingly. Nathan walked over to shine the light directly on it. He got a creepy feeling. There's no dirt around it, because that wasn't dug from the outside. It was dug from underground. Nathan stepped back and turned around to desperately shine his light around. His light began flickering. "Oh no, the flashlight's going dead," he said as he repeatedly hit it to try to get the light back on. Each time it died. Mindy started sobbing. "Nathan, let's get out of here. Something is down here," she said. She held his arm. The flashlight died for good, and it was pitch black. Suddenly, the cellar door slammed shut. Nathan and Mindy stopped moving. Rachel? Nathan said. It was dead quiet. "Rachel, is that you?" he said again. After a moment of quiet, Mindy screamed, "Rachel, it's not funny. Open the door." It was pitch dark and quiet as Mindy and Nathan stood there in a cellar, not knowing who was there or where to go. Suddenly, something grabbed Nathan and Mindy and pulled them by their legs, dragging them underground as Mindy screamed. Rachel was sitting in the van when she heard a faint scream in the distance. She got out of the van and ran into the house screaming, Mindy, where are you?" She followed the screams to the cellar door as she tried to open it but couldn't. The scream from the cellar stopped and Rachel covered her mouth to try to stop her panting from being heard. Rachel heard footsteps coming up the stairs from the other side of the door. Rachel ran out of the house to the van and jumped in the driver's seat. She reached down to the ignition and let out a sigh of relief as she realized the keys were in there. She turned the van crank over as she turned her head to the house. The door to the house slowly closed as the van started. Rachel was just sobbing as she jammed the gas pedal and drove away. Rachel reported what happened to the police and filed a missing persons report on Mindy and Nathan. The local authorities searched the house and the cellar but found no traces of them. The only thing they found were a flashlight. Although one of the policemen thought he heard a faint screaming coming from deep underground, when he asked his partner if they could hear it too, they claimed they could not. Rachel told the police about the footsteps and the door closing as she left. Nobody knows what happened to the bodies of Mindy and Nathan, and Rachel is convinced that they are still down there. And if you go to that house and stand in the cellar, you will hear their cries for help. There have been 3 instances in my life where I have felt like I was going to be abducted. I'm a woman, and I'm currently 23 years old. I'm also on the petite side, standing at a whopping 5'3" and weighing roughly around 115 pounds. Because of this, I typically wear heels or platform boots so that I can appear taller than I actually am. This story happened this spring while at a second-hand store. I was looking to find a good side table style cabinet and my boyfriend came with me because I have already been nearly abducted twice in my life. I could write about these in the future if you would like. And I suffer from CPTSD in part of that, so I'm not really able to go out in public by myself unless I'm with someone, going to class or going to work. Lucky for me, my boyfriend is 6'3", lean but muscular, has a very deep, intimidating voice, and has absolutely no issues with taking physical action if I needed it. But basically, it's like having my own caring, personal bodyguard. For context, the area I live in is bad for human trafficking. I live in northern Wisconsin, but close to Minneapolis. The I-94 runs basically straight to Minneapolis from the Dells. I grew up in that area and I know full well that the Dells has bad trafficking issues too because of the high levels of tourism in that area. Plus, Baraboo, the next town over from the Dells, still has running cargo trains that are rumored to be contributing to the trafficking. But that's not entirely relevant. The town I currently live in is split in half by the same interstate, and there's a Walmart right by the exit, also infamous for trafficking. There have been many abductions of women in our town in various locations all over, and it isn't a secret to anybody that it's an issue for the area. Now, with the story. My boyfriend and I go to the next town over to look for a cabinet-styled side table because the second-hand shops in our town don't sell furniture. We get inside and look around a little bit before my boyfriend says he needs to go to the bathroom. I keep browsing nearby the bathrooms in a display area for desks, dressers, etc. And I find this neat vintage vanity with hidden organizers in the top of the desk, and I start looking at it and checking out its little features. While doing so, I feel eyes on me, so I look around to see if I'm being watched by someone. Sure enough, in the row of desks behind me, there's a middle-aged man looking at me with no facial expressions. I'm dressed in a skirt and knee socks, and this is one of my go-to looks, so glaring at creepy men eyeing me up isn't something new to me. But since I'm alone now and don't want to anger the guy, I give him the cliche Midwestern half smile and move up the row away from him, but towards the corner of the section. Suddenly, this guy practically runs to the row I'm in, so I take a right and head up towards where he was standing when I initially spotted him. He picks up pace, and I am now half running, trying to get away from him, and after a small chase around the furniture, we end up in a situation where I'm standing on one side of the row of desks and he is standing on the other, waiting to see which way I will go, at a standstill. At this moment, I try looking to my left towards the other furniture and bathrooms to see if anyone is around to witness this, and thank Gaia, my boyfriend is out of the bathroom, already walking towards us, with a very squared-up posture. He looks livid, and his eyes are locked solidly onto this creep that was chasing me around the furniture just a second ago. My boyfriend reaches my side and puts his arm around my shoulder, protectively, and he and the creep make eye contact. They honestly both looked equally angry. The guy doesn't say anything, just walks away, but every few minutes or so we see him looking at us from a few aisles away, wherever we are in the store, and I am anxious as hell at this point and just want to leave. My boyfriend is trying to do his best to reassure me and calm me down in the best way he knows, but with no avail. He eventually distracts me from the guy by finding a perfect side table that I was looking for. Dark cherry wood, glass door, shelves, beautiful and only $30, not to mention a student discount. We picked it up and head to the checkout. The entire time I am paranoid and looking around to see if this guy is near us. He is currently being checked out at the register, and we are being separated by 2 other customers. My anxiety spikes again, but I try not to let it show. When he is done, he walks through the first set of doors to exit, but is still in the first entrance of the store just standing there. He looks at me, and we make eye contact a few times, while I'm in line and then checking out. I make it a point to stand on the right side of my boyfriend, carrying my new find out, and holding eye contact with the creep the whole time we exit and get to the car. He doesn't say or do anything. He didn't follow us, he just stared at me, and we get to the car safely. Although I am still paranoid and trying to get the side table in the car and secured as fast as possible, which is just making me fumble more, but regardless, we left safe and made it home okay. I can't say for certain that this man was trying to abduct me, let alone if he was working with human traffickers, but I highly doubt he was chasing and stalking me around the store with pure intentions. So these are 4 experiences I've had growing up in a small town in western Michigan from the age of 6 to 18, when I eventually left the state. I will put them in order of how they happened. When I was 6 years old, during the summer, I would always wake up before my mom and walk to our living room and look out of our sliding door for deer. My parents owned about 7 acres, and almost all of it was an open field. This particular morning though, I walked up to the slider and looked out, and the only way I can describe what I saw was this big-headed black dog thing that was just staring back at me from less than 100 yards away. It looked like it was just staring me in the eyes, like it knew I had just saw it. It almost knew that I had just walked up to the sliding glass door, I felt. I saw it leaning on a low-hanging branch, and it just didn't seem right. The head was so massive. Most of my family owned large dogs, so I knew it just didn't seem quite right. It seemed more dog-like rather than bear-like. I sprinted back to my room and waited until my mom woke up, but never said anything about it. The second weird thing I saw years later was, of course, another morning when I woke up in early November, when I was 10 years old, again looking for deer. This time I saw something running along the tree line about 100 yards away. It was about the height of a Great Dane if I had to guess, and had a silverish gray color. It wasn't multicolor, just one flat color, and it was huge. The head, again, was shaped more like a wolf. Its fur was short, but it wasn't shaggy, which was weird because in November, in Michigan, everything was getting its winter coat. It was just trotting along the wood line, stopping, and what looked like marking, and then it would keep on walking, just like a dog or a wolf would. But it was incredibly tall and unbelievably quick. The third encounter was when I was 13 years old and just got into trapping. I was setting up a trap one night, hoping to catch a coyote. Suddenly, I hear just this absolute heart-thumping, bone-snapping sound coming from the woods. All I hear is these snaps and crunches. I then realize there are no birds making any noises at all. I know you shouldn't turn your back and run if you ever think there's a predator, but I was not sticking around to see what was making that noise. I went out the next day with my 30-30 and retrieved my trapping gear. Surprisingly, nothing even touched the bait. The final story is the one that scared me the most. I was 17 years old. It was a summer evening, and we would leave our sliding glass door open sometimes, just with our screen door closed so we could have a nice breeze in the house. We had a black lab that would just lay by the screen door and smell all the scents from outside. She normally did this every night. But on this night in question, she started to growl and her hackles came up and she slowly walked away from the door. So I walked over to the screen door, and in the woodline a little over 100 yards away, I could hear something heavy moving through the woods. I always kept a flashlight near the door because I would like to shine and see how many deer would walk through the field at night, and also be able to see where my dog was. No, I never poached a deer or shot at them at night. I just like to see how many there were walking around. So, while I shined the light, I saw a set of eyes pop up in this clearing in the woods. The light was not quite bright enough to pick up anything but eye shine, so when I saw the eyes, they definitely weren't the whites of a deer's eyes, that's for sure. They were bluish red, like just a color I don't even know how to explain. They were wider apart than a deer as well, or anything I had ever seen before. Now, I couldn't tell you the exact distance it was because the clearing was probably about 75 yards long and 40 yards wide, but the eyes were unusually far apart, and it wasn't blinking. It just stared at me, seemingly soulless. As I'm writing this, I have goosebumps all over me. So, after staring for a minute, I decided to make a deer snort sound to see if it would turn its head. No dice. I made the noise 3 more times, very loudly, and to no avail, it just stared, not blinking at all. So I decided I would stomp on the wooden deck. I stomped twice, and it woke up my brother, and my mom came out and asked me what was going on. The whole time I just stared back at this thing, and it stared back at me, and it never blinked. I decided that I needed to go back inside and lock the door. Ever since then I've had no clue what it was, but I guess I never really have wanted to find out either.
A Creature Outside My Window by Starless Eon. I was between the ages of 10 and 14 when this happened. Growing up, I lived on a dull street in a middle-class one-story house. My bedroom faced the front veranda, which had many plants. Just around the corner and down the hall from my bedroom was a study used as a spare room and computer room. I used to watch TV in that room, and on this particular night, it was boiling, so I opened the door to the veranda. There was a thin fly screen with no lock we would pull across when the door was open. It was so hot when I went to bed that I kept my bedroom windows and curtains wide open. I was having trouble sleeping and laid there staring at the ceiling. Then I heard what sounded like someone walking around on the veranda. The ground was cement pebbles, and there was a lot of dirt from the pot plants, which made a distinct sound when you walk on it. At first, I assumed it was one of my parents, but it was very late at night, and that wouldn't have made any sense. I craned my neck to look out the window. I saw a gaunt, skeletal hunched-over figure slowly shuffling towards my bedroom window in the dark.
It made a raspy sound as it shuffled around. I was sure it couldn't see me, but from how its head was moving, it looked like it was searching for something. Despite this reasonably creepy thing happening outside of my bedroom window, I still felt somewhat safe in the comfort of my bed inside my locked house. Then I realized I had left the study door open. All that stood between whatever the hell this thing was in my house was a tiny screen door with no lock. I knew I had to lock that door, and I had to do it fast. This was almost at my bedroom window, and would soon be at the study door. I slid out of my bed and crawled on my stomach out of my room and down the hallway to the study. As I reached the door, intending to close it quickly, I realized my mistake. I would have to open the screen door to get the door to close. From where I was lying, I could see this thing hunched over and peering into my bedroom window. I think it heard or sensed me lying there because it turned and shuffled over and bent down to where I was lying. I held my breath as this thing put its face right against the screen and peered in at me, its raspy breath sounding like death. In the dark, I could make out part of a face, but it looked gaunt and sickly, either with very thin or no skin. I couldn't see any eyes, or they were simply empty sockets. I didn't move as its face pressed against the fly screen, seemingly looking at me. Suddenly, its face distorted in terror, its eye sockets and mouth opening wide. It let out a blood-curdling shriek, a shriek that sounded like fear, and it bolted off into the night. I lay there silently, frozen in fear and disbelief over what had just happened, listening to ensure it was gone. As soon as I dared to move, I opened the fly screen, shut it, and locked the veranda door, and I returned to my room, shut the windows, and drew the curtains. I kept peeking through the curtain, expecting it to return, but for some reason, it never did. I've thought about this encounter ever since, and I've never been sure of what to make of it. I never told anyone about it either. I don't even know where to begin, and I never really understood why it reacted in fear when it saw me. The Shadow Creature by Mario H. Hey everyone. My name is Mario, and I am a paranormal investigator. I have only been at this since last July and have yet to experience all the oddities the paranormal offers, but still, I have experienced enough to share some creepy stories. I also know enough about the supernatural to classify my findings. I am baffled, disturbed, and curious all at the same time about a recent anomaly I encountered this past weekend. I attended a paranormal investigation event at the Joseph Philippi Winery in Rancho Cucamonga, California. The evening I had its fair share of weird disembodied voices, footsteps, light anomalies, and even some random apparitions. I'm not really ready to say any of these are definitive proof of existence, as I'm not thoroughly reviewed any of this stuff and I investigate with a level of skepticism, but all those occurrences aside, the one unknown oddity of the evening has left me somewhat disturbed about what I witnessed lurking in the shadows of Elena House, the last area we investigated that night. Let me preface this discovery by stating that while I did see this shadowy creature being with my own eyes, my fiancé also saw the same thing. We kept quiet about it until leaving the building, only stating that we both saw something in there, but not elaborating on what we saw, so as not to influence our descriptions. As we exited the area, the other people in our group walked by when we suddenly saw a lady from our group with her guest, who pulled us aside and began to recount her happenings within the Elena house, as we had investigated. She described hearing, near the end of the investigation, sounds of someone walking behind her in the empty room. Please keep in mind the building is undergoing reconstruction, and there are no residents in the house. All that stands are wooden beams in door/window frames. She also described hearing the sound of heavy breathing, and said she felt whatever was there was pushing down on her soul. Those were her words, the words she used precisely. She appeared very disturbed and unnerved by the event. We both agreed we had seen something in the house, but did not describe anything to each other. With hesitation, mainly due to being dumbfounded by what I saw, we sketched a drawing of the quote-unquote entity. It is so imprinted in my mind that I had to share this experience to see what people think. Hopefully someone else has seen something similar to what I've seen and can share their knowledge. I saw a dark, shaded figure lurking in the darkness just behind our group. We were about 15 people centered in one room in a circle. The creature had elongated, muscular arms, legs with longer than average fingers, toes, and fingernails. Despite its muscular limbs, the torso was emaciated to the point that the outline of its ribs, I put quotes around ribs because I'm not sure if this thing was even human enough to constitute it as a rib cage, was visible. Its head had large, hollow, empty, and dark eye sockets. There were small empty nostril slits on its face where a nose would be if it were human. Shockingly, the odd deformity of this creature was its mouth. It wasn't even really a mouth at all. It was like this elongated, drooping jaw. It looked like it was melting, like that melting clay with empty spaces in between. It moved in the shadows, just a few feet away from the group, swinging its limbs as it walked like it was striding in a pacing manner. It truly disturbed me. As the days passed, I began questioning what I had seen. Like I said, I investigate skeptically, so I debunked what I could plausibly. I could chalk this up to the darkness playing tricks on my mind, but 2 other people saw the same thing I did. How is that even possible? Why would we all see the same thing and have it be a figment of our imaginations? It just doesn't make sense. I can only hesitantly conclude that I saw some type of shadow creature. Generally, I have understood that shadow creatures don't necessarily take any specific form. If this was some sort of shadow figure or creature, it wouldn't make sense that it chose this weird form. Has anybody else ever experienced something like this? I'm trying to keep some semblance of reality, but I am totally open to what it could be. My friend is Mohawk raised, Seneca native. He has received some training in shamanism, has a full kit, his mask, full regalia, the whole deal. One evening, my girlfriend at the time, H, this guy, C, and I were at a local conservation area. He felt a presence and expressed an interest in returning at night to hold a ceremony. We agreed and returned 2 weeks later. There are wooden stairs set in the ground leading to the top of a lookout area, which at the time was under construction. We arrived at midnight, climbed the stairway and crested the hilltop. He dressed in his regalia, lit some sage, and began to chant in Mohawk. The vibe changed immediately. I remember scanning the tree line as I looked around the area. On a second pass along the line, one of the taller silhouettes was gone. Had some 10-foot person or entity been standing there between me and the trees? Before I could begin to wonder at this missing hump in the dark tree line, C had stopped his chanting. Something is here. I think it's a shaman spirit. He turned and began to chant again. At this point, I was looking down the hill, and I suddenly heard a screech. The best description I can think of is a garage door in desperate need of oiling, closing loudly. Then we heard it again. H turned toward me with her eyes wide and said, "It's getting closer." The thing proceeded to approach us. Somewhere above in the trees in the forest to our right, it was calling in regular intervals as it approached, this loud, screeching noise. As we tracked it with our ears, we looked straight at each other in the dark, and then straight up. The regularity of the cry meant the next one should have been directly overhead. There was nothing above us against the starry background, and no further cry was heard. C wrapped up his ceremony. He gathered his things and we started to leave. He told us he had a vision of a red wolf watching us from the forest. He thought whatever the spirit was powerful and not benevolent. I made it to the stairs before C and H proceeded down them. A few steps in, and the flashlight showed a black mass on the stairs that most definitely had not been there when we came up. A crow wing. Not a feather or parts of an animal. Not like something had been eating it, but an entire wing. I remember towing the edge to make sure it was legit. C came up behind me. "Please tell me you didn't touch it." When I told him I had used my shoe to nudge it a little, he immediately got out a sage and washed the smoke all around me in a full body smudge, chanting in Mohawk as he did so. Then we went back to the car and back to town. We commented that it still felt just as weird in the car as it had in the hilltop. We dropped C off at his house, then my girlfriend H and I went home. When we got home, I go to bed and H says she is going to read in the living room for a bit. I kiss her goodnight and go to bed. Sometime later I am awakened by a quiet knock on the door. I say come in. I assume that it's my girlfriend, but it's my friend C. He looks scared. He said, could I come to see you? Are you okay? He told me that it followed us home. What do you mean, C? He described that he had gone to bed shortly after we dropped him off, fell asleep and was awoken suddenly because he could not breathe.
There was a pressure on his chest, like something or someone was sitting on him, trying to suffocate him. As he strained for breath, just as he was worried about losing consciousness, the pressure would lift. He would get 1 or 2 deep sucking breaths in, and the weight would return. He finally decided to come to see if we were okay, and maybe if we could fight back together if I was not. I told him I had been sleeping fine, but if he wanted to stay, he was welcome. He said H had already agreed that that was a good idea and would sleep on the couch. C laid down beside me. Also, as soon as he did, I felt it. My chest was constricted by an unseen weight. I could not take in air. C grabbed my hand as I noticed he was not able to draw in either. And over the next long while, the same thing he described was happening to him at his place happened to both of us at mine. Pressure and gasping. And just when our lungs would begin to burn with the need of air, the pressure would be gone. We would get 1, maybe 2 deep breaths, and slam, that unnatural weight was on our chest again. Over and over and over. Eventually the assault either ended, or we passed out. I remember waking up at some point much later feeling someone beside me, remembering C and being surprised when I saw H laying there. I remember saying, "Oh, it's you," and hearing a questioning mumble from her before sleep overtook me again. The first thing the next morning, H asked me what I meant when I said, "Oh, it's you." I explained that I was surprised that C had left. "C?" she says, looking over at me like I am crazy. "Yeah, when did he leave?" "He never came over." I was insistent that he had. I know the difference between reality and dreamland, but no, apparently I had a very, very vivid but totally normal nightmare. Nothing to worry about. Chalk it up as the strangest dream experience I had ever had, and we go on with our lives. 2 days later, H comes running into the apartment after work. She is a barista at a very cool indie coffee shop downtown that C and I both frequented. She explained that C had been in, and I was to go to his place immediately. "Why? H, is everything alright?" She looked uncomfortable. Not exactly scared, but not okay either. She refused to give me any more details, and to this day I am so grateful she did not. She just explained she had sent him home and told him to wait for me there. I get in the car and head to C's house. I knock on the front door and his mom lets me in. I head to his room and into the back. I knock and enter. "Hey man, how's it going?" he asked. I tell him I'm fine. I just wondered if everything was okay. You were gone when I woke up the other day. Immediately a tingle went through my body and chill iced my spine. "Excuse me?" "Yeah, you came over the other night, after you dropped me off because something had followed us home and was suffocating you as you slept. When you laid down with me, it started hitting both of us. It still gives me chills to this day." C had come into the coffee shop that afternoon and asked H if I was okay after leaving his place. She expressed some interesting confusion. She told her his story, and without saying a single word about me or my experience, she told C very calmly that she was done with work at 5 and would very much appreciate it if he could be home around then because she was sending me there as soon as she got home. He was startled and agreed to do so. The reason I appreciate this is she did not want to ruin the wonder of it by revealing the truth to us. She let us discover it from each other. Something did indeed come home with us, and apparently disguised itself as a close friend to conduct a paranormal torment. Apparently it came to C disguised as me, and came to me looking like him. To start this story off and to give a little insight about me, I'm an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan and have lived in the country for as long as I can remember. And for heads up, this is a long story, so bear with me. On one particular hot summer weekend, I and a couple of my friends, including my boyfriend, let us call him Tony, and my older brother, let us call him Brad, decided we were going to go camping for the weekend, since it was such a warm week. Tony's parents had owned a cabin way out in Ludington, surrounded by a huge wooded area, with a personal lake and no neighbors for at least 4 miles. But being stupid teenagers, we did not really think about that. All we were ready for was to party, as any normal teen would. Well, after being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends had brought tons of alcohol and weed to last us for the weekend, so we would not be bored since we had no cell service out there and only movies to watch. After it got around 12 a.m. and it was pitch black outside, we had a huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony. As we talked and laughed about upcoming events in our lives, we were so distracted that we did not even notice that my brother had literally frozen his eyes onto one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all a little bit intoxicated and kind of high at the time. Eventually, our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. "Hey dude, you alright?" he asked Brad. Silence was all he got in reply. Brad did not reply or even make any movements that would indicate he had been heard. After that, I started to get scared as well as the other 2 girls there. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first to catch on that he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods. I turned my head and followed his gaze the best I could, and when I finally caught on to what he was staring at, my heart dropped. There was, at first glance, a dog. At least that's what I thought it was. It was some person's dog that had wandered off, right? But then my brain kicked in and I realized there were no neighbors for miles. So how could there be a dog? My mind started to race while Tony still tried to get Brad to speak or even move. In one motion, this thing stood up tall. And when I say tall, I mean gigantic. This thing had to be at least 6 foot tall. Everyone saw it then. How could you not? The other 2 girls, and the other boy with us, gasped as they finally grasped why my brother was still as a stick. No one moved for what seemed like hours. Tony was the first to talk. No tail, he mumbled. No one heard what he said but Brad, and I swear to you, when I say his eyes were wide and as big as pan saucers, I mean it. That freaked me out immediately. "What did you say?" one of the girls asked. "It has no freaking tail," he hissed at her. My heartbeat stopped. He was right. There was no tail on this thing. Suddenly, my clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized what this thing could possibly be. Now I understood why my brother was basically crapping his pants. This thing was a Skinwalker. My instincts kicked in right then and there, but before I could nope out of there, the thing let out a terrible stench, like rotten meat, right before screaming something that sounds like straight out of a demon movie. The sound was enough to scare everyone. I told everyone to just run as fast as they can. My brother was the first out of his chair. He started shouting native words to the creature. No one questioned anything that we were saying. They just saw how deadly serious we were. He has never seen me so scared. Tony was absolutely baffled, so he knew it was a bad situation. We all hightailed it to the cabin with my brother in tow, still shouting native words at the creature. It seemed to keep it at bay, while it gave us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door before turning off all the lights and grabbing special ash from the kitchen counters and starting to throw at every window and door while chanting. Of course, he had everyone freaked out and basically in tears at the moment. All of us were still in shock for a while, and after he was done, no one said anything for a long time. He grabbed our dad's pistol and had it posted by him for hours. Everyone was entirely too shaken up to even question what happened. We must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke up to my brother packing all of our stuff into the cars early in the morning. I understand why. We have a native family. We knew that we were dealing with something way too strong for us, and we knew it would come back, and maybe not even alone. Before we left, I did one blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the still very freaked out girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up. To this day, we still have not explained exactly to our friends what happened that night, and they never bothered to ask us either. Through the years, I have met people who were so intrigued by this subject. Some embraced the stories I have shared, and others believed them to just be stories. I had worked with one friend who never really believed in these encounters, and believed them to be just scary stories to tell children. So, it came as no surprise when he would encounter a Skinwalker himself and become a believer in our supernatural beliefs. His encounter with the Skinwalker terrified him so bad that he never doubted anyone's story ever again. He had told me this story the following day at work. He said he had been at home that night when he got a call from a female friend that needed a ride from work, so being a good friend, he picked her up and drove her home. After he picked her up, they began talking on the drive back. It was about a 15-mile ride outside of town. They had picked up a late dinner and decided that they would eat at a spot she liked. As they sat and ate and talked for a couple of hours, he claimed that he heard small taps on the back of his window. Not really paying any attention to it, he said that the taps became louder and more noticeable. After a while, she began to get extremely nervous and told him that it would be better to just leave. As he started up his car, a huge bang came from behind them as if someone had hit them head-on. Freaking out, he said he put his car into drive, and like a bat out of hell, wondering what caused that noise, he told her he wanted to pull off to the side of the road and see if there was any damage to his car. Telling him no, and not to do this, and to keep going, they sped all the way back to her house. After about 20 minutes, they finally reached her house, both terrified at what had happened. He said they just sat in his car, dumbstruck. He finally asked her what the hell happened. She looked at him and told him that a Skinwalker had been following her for the past few weeks. Thinking to himself that she was crazy and she was making it up, he told her that he did not believe in it and tried to rationalize that maybe someone had hit them. It was not until they got out to go look at the back where the loud bang had come from. It was at that moment that his blood froze in his veins. As they approached the back of the car, they saw the dent on the trunk of the car, but this dent was only the size of a human hand and had left a handprint. Freaking out, he explained that she was nearly in tears and told him that he needed to get back home as fast as he could. As he left her house, he said that he sped all the way home. When he finally got back, he explained that he was not entirely sure what had happened and went to look at the dent. Still shocked at the sight, his fears got worse. As he was walking back in the house he was staying at, he happened to look down the street and saw a black figure standing at the end, hunched over like a dog. Freaking out more, he said that he stayed up all night afraid that this Skinwalker or whatever it was would come for him next. The following morning, I had just arrived at work when he also was pulling in. His eyes were heavy. It looked like he had not slept much. He then told me of his encounter. Startled by his revelation, he showed me the dent on his car. The previous day we had been hanging out by his car, and I did not see a dent. From there, he had been plagued by nightmares of this thing. It was probably 4 to 5 months later he finally quit and moved back to his hometown. I still don't know what happened to him, but I hope that his nightmares stopped and that he had found peace with himself.
What Did I Encounter? By Salad Goats. I've never shared this experience with anyone besides my brother. When I was about 13 years old, I lived in a rural British Columbia. One night, I was in the hot tub on the deck outside, watching the woods, taking in the silence. It was winter, and we had recently had snowfall that left around knee-deep snow. It was around 2 to 3 a.m., and out of nowhere, this vast wolf came out of the woods. It was bigger than anything I had ever seen. I remember its shimmering silver coat and bright piercing green eyes. As this wolf was walking along the fence of our paddocks, it locked eyes with mine, and we just stared at each other for what felt like an eternity as he walked past me, both alone in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. To this day, what happened instantly made a spin and shiver go down my spine. As the wolf passed, he walked towards our barn with our horses in it. It became darker as it entered the barn, but the other side still had a bright light illuminating the outside, which I could see. Halfway through, this wolf changed from a wolf to a much larger, bigger, broad-shouldered person. The horses didn't make a single sound, and this person, this thing, who now stood roughly 7 feet tall, rounded the corner towards the open field, but never emerged from the other side, and I never saw it again. My brother had his encounter with this same wolf hybrid creature, I'm guessing, when he told me that he woke up randomly one night from the feeling of being watched. He then looked out his window to see a vast wolf walking away from his window, so I'm guessing it was watching him sleep for one reason or another. This place we lived was on old native ground from what I was told. Our barn was an old schoolhouse where the Catholic priest would put the native children and teach them lessons about Christ. It still had an old desk and several chairs inside. My brother and I have seen children's faces in the panes of the glass from that barn, and lights turning on and off randomly. We had closet doors slam repeatedly for minutes at a time, footsteps and feelings of being watched. In my room, I saw glowing red eyes on the ceiling and hid under my covers till morning. Anyway, the main subject of this story, and the subject I'm seeking answers to, is what I encountered outside that night. After I looked around myself, the closest thing I could find was either skinwalkers or wendigos. But from what I've read online, these things usually have deformed features or something like that makes them horrific looking. What I saw wasn't necessarily normal, but it was a rather regular wolf besides it being super massive until it changed its entire form. I know this is long-winded, but thank you for sharing it. The Supply Caravan Skinwalker by Connor P. After talking with a friend recently who I used to do supply caravans with back in the day on the Navajo reservation, it came to my attention that one of the gals who accompanied the caravan a couple of years ago had a curious experience. I was able to get contact info for her and get in touch with her. Let's call her Amanda. I interviewed her about her encounter, and I wanted to share it. To respect the subject's culture and taboo nature, we changed the names and categorizations of whatever she experienced down there. Just a bit of background. Peabody Coal Mining leases tracts of land in and around Black Mesa. The landscape is one of shallow, topographical reliefs marked by dry draws and arroyos, which are essentially dry creek beds that flood during periods of heavy rain, which granted is not a very common occurrence in the high deserts of Arizona. When I turned around, I was trying to retrieve a lamb who had escaped the enclosure one afternoon. I couldn't retrace my steps to Johnny's compound where his parents Hogan are. I was following an arroyo, hoping it would lead me to a road, when I started having an asthma attack. I think that it started because of the dust, I'm not sure, but I started hyperventilating and had a full-blown panic attack because I lost consciousness, and when I came to, it was already nighttime. I stood up and looked around. I heard something like a twig snapping behind me and looked around even heavier. I thought I had seen something duck behind a tree in the moonlight. It looked like the dark shape of a person who had been peering around the tree, but withdrew when I noticed it. But I could tell that it was still there. I called out, "Hello?" which was followed by silence. "Hello? Is someone there? I'm in the Colorado caravan. I think I'm lost." I laughed nervously. "Can you help me?" After a moment or so, the figure peered back out around the tree. This time it looked like my friend Charlie from the caravan. The figure stepped out from behind the tree and motioned for me to follow. Thinking that this was Charlie, and he had been sent to bring me back to camp, and being a bit disoriented myself, I followed the figure back up the draw. We'd been walking for about 5 to 10 minutes when another figure seemingly materialized from the shadows before us. I felt a bolt of pain like a severe migraine and had to stop. When I looked up, I saw 3 more figures standing in a semicircle. Now the figures did not look human, but rather like large coyotes, and I could see 10 eyes looking back at me in the dim silver light. I started to stumble back. I noticed the coyotes didn't seem to move as I ran away. I ran for about 5 minutes before I stopped to catch my breath. I heard another twig snap and looked back to see one of the coyote's shapes silhouetted on the ridgeline. To my horror, the coyote appeared to stand up on its hind legs and let out a bone-chilling scream. I've heard other people describe this before, but it almost sounded like a coyote howl, magnified through a megaphone and then distorted with a heavy reverb-like sound effect. My head was pounding, but I truly felt in fear for my life, so I kept running. Eventually I came to a service road and could flag down a Peabody mine worker driving down the road in a work vehicle. I convinced him to give me a ride and told him about our caravan leader Buck, who could explain the situation to his manager. As I climbed into the cab of his truck and started driving, I looked in the rear view mirror and saw those eyes reflecting in the red brake lights. I don't think they followed us, but I couldn't be sure. When we got back, I went to my friend Johnny's parents' house. We got inside, I explained the situation. Unfortunately, they only spoke Dene, but I could finally express what happened between broken sobs and sniffling. In the morning, they called a medicine man, and nothing overnight seemingly happened further. They came, blessed myself and the house, and everything seemed to be fine, but they did cut my trip short after that. Skinwalker in the Pac West? By Lee Lee. I wanted to share my personal experience and get some validation that I'm not crazy. I shared this as a possible encounter because I don't know really what to believe. So a couple of years ago, my mom and I were leaving from a visit with my grandmother. For reference, she lives in an old folks mobile park in southern Washington's countryside. It's completely dark out, and I'm driving the car with my headlights on, high beams on, all that good stuff. As we take the exit road, I slam on my brakes as what looks like a coyote darts in front of my car. My mom and I both saw it. It shot to the left, and I followed it with my eyes as it ran into the field. There were cows beside us. It was hard to see exactly where it went, but we both saw it. My mom didn't have great vision and lost it in the darkness, but I could still see it for a good minute. Sharing this always makes people look at me funny, but this was the most honest thing I've ever seen. This coyote thing stood up on its hind legs and was much taller than any average coyote would have ever been. Somehow, somewhere, between it running in the field and standing up, I noticed antlers on its head, like moose antlers. My eyes started to water, and I felt the worst sensation flood over me, like I needed to get away now. I had goosebumps all over my body, and even though my mom did not see it, she had goosebumps as well. Like her body knew something was wrong. I'm sure I'm not the only one to have ever experienced something like this. Has anybody else seen anything similar? This happened about 3 years ago now, and I still remember it vividly. I live in Mississippi, and I am Christian, I guess, because I'm not actually sure what religion I am anymore, but I swear all of these experiences are very real. So, there is a patch of woods near my house that I have always called the creek because, it has a creek. Garrett, my cousin who I fight with a lot, because we hang out a lot, have seen some things here. We used to go to this creek a lot, before his parents found out that he was going there behind their back and stopped him because it's quote-unquote dangerous to be there. And maybe about the third time we dared each other to go into the deep woods. The reason I say deep is that there's an exceptionally large patch of nice woods that is technically part of the creek, but there is an immediate cutoff of darkness, pencil-thin trees, and an overall feeling of eeriness. We both started walking towards it and laughing at how scared we were. There was a loud screech, like almost ear-piercingly loud. We booked it out of there. I had just told him that I had known about skinwalkers, which was not much, I'm not going to lie, but it was enough to be scary, and we were both terrified. So we get out of the creek and sat right outside of it, breathing hard and looking into the creek. We kept seeing something black about the size of a deer, which there are not really any deer there at all. This thing was darting through the trees. We kept going to the creek, probably a terrible idea, but neither of us really cared if we died because legit everything sucks. I found the right side of the jaw of a wolf. It had all of its teeth except one. 2 of the teeth were removable actually, it was interesting. It is obviously somewhat new because it still has the enamel on it, and it looked very saturated. That was the moment I started my bone collection, which is right next to me as I write this. Even before we encountered what we believed to be a skinwalker, we saw things darting around and weird sounds. We still often hear these things and see these things. There is what we call a demon in my house, who has the name of George. He likes messing with people, knocking on stuff, opening the bathroom door, moving in the corner of your eye. But he would not intentionally hurt anyone. But now recently, there's another thing I believe sits in the right far top corner from where I am, and every night, it moves around. It likes touching me where I do not want to be touched, aka the butt, the thighs, down my back and chest. This thing that I'm pretty sure is some sort of incubus or succubus likes putting what feels like a hand or hands down my shirt in places that I listed. It has happened twice now, and it's really getting on my nerves. There have been other times that Garrett and I have encountered things that I would not consider your ordinary animal. There are 2 abandoned houses up the street, one burnt down, and the other just far back from the road that it was forgotten. At both houses, and at our own houses, we have seen a white or possibly pink or peach-colored animal that looks like a humanoid. It walks on all 4s and has a gaping mouth and big black eyes. Every time we have seen it, we both go right back to our houses. We're too scared to try to figure out what it is, but I think it might be connected to that skinwalker from the creek. I grew up and live and work in a small town in northern Florida. We have a decent-sized population of Native Americans who live in the east part of our town, though I am not sure if there's a reserve out that way or not. We have Native American gatherings 4 times a year that is open to all, so I grew up going to them and listening to their stories. I also listened to my grandmother tell me the same story since her first husband told them to her. I am not super informed, but I know enough to know skinwalkers are the real deal. I work at a Waffle House in this said town during the night shift, 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I have experienced some weird things to say the least. I am currently about 3 hours into my shift, and to say this noise outside is strange is an understatement. This town is on lockdown still due to COVID and the hurricane, so no one is out on the street. Barely any cars are on the road, and barely any customers come in either. To set this up, my Waffle House is on the main highway. There is a few shops across the street, a small shop to our left, and nothing to our right. Just a small road and a small empty field. Behind us is pure woods for a good half mile before it's a few houses, but not many. Like I said, it's a small town. I am sitting outside on a smoke break right now, and there is this sound that's coming from a small patch of woods directly across the street, separating a few of the shops. It sounded at first like something I could not identify, then changed into what sounded like a person imitating a monkey, then a person imitating a dog barking and back and forth, changing every few seconds or minute or so. Not loud enough to sound like it was an actual animal, but something just being quiet enough to get my attention with it. I just went inside to help someone and came back out. It had stopped for a few minutes while the cook was outside with me, but it started up again, now having an odd call mixed in with it, almost like an incredibly quiet, spaced out car alarm. It goes single dog bark, monkey sound, car alarm, all sounding like a mix between a person and an animal. Whatever is doing it is definitely doing it to get my attention. It is raspy and right across the street, but if there were any of those things there, they would be much louder. I keep thinking I am seeing things moving over there, and the sounds are getting louder and louder and sounding more desperate for my attention. At this point, it is just the car alarm sound. It really does sound like a raspy voice imitating it. If the cook were not right around the back, I would have been freaking out much more. Can you guys please tell me if you think this was a skinwalker? If you guys think it is, I am definitely transferring Waffle Houses. I'm not even joking. I never thought I would be doing this, but this started 2 hours ago. I was at my aunt's birthday party, and their house was pretty haunted when they first moved into it.
I knew there was always something there watching me, but now, I know why I have that feeling. They are demons or other monsters of the night, and they would always attempt to do things. My mom told me that my aunt's hair was being pulled on before, and I would ask questions about it, but I stopped with the supernatural stuff after they got the house blessed. I recently got back into that stuff though, like skinwalkers and the like. I've had some experiences with them. So, back to the actual story. I was sitting on my aunt's couch, and I had this feeling that someone was watching me. I thought it could be a skinwalker that followed me there, but I'm not so sure it was, but I also can't say that it's not. I thought it might be my cousin who was always trying to scare me, but when I turned around, I saw something I can't really explain. I saw this black thing walk by and duck down under the back of the couch. I looked back there, and there's no one there. So I looked up and see my uncle who is down the hallway that is looking behind the couch. He's looking at me with eyes of fear. He is my aunt's husband who saw it. We look at each other, and I get the feeling of dread. I know that we both saw it. So I get up and walk out to the kitchen to see where my sister is. I was told she was in the basement. I went down there and told her that I am going to leave because I saw something, and I'm not going to stay anymore. She says, not the place and time. So I go to my dad who is in the kitchen and tell him I am leaving. He says okay, so I go to my mom. But then I look at my uncle one last time and he still has that same face. So I tell my mom I am leaving. My gram lives across the street from my aunt's house, so I go there with the feeling of dread and someone watching me. As I'm walking across the street, I swear I hear footsteps behind me. But every time I look, I don't see anything. The moment that I get out the door though, it stops. So fast forward, and I'm in the car with my mom and sister, and we are talking about it. My mom says that maybe there was a ghost attached to you. So, I start rolling my eyes laughing, thinking that maybe, but I don't think it's so, simple. I'm in the shower, and I hear an old man voice say, "Help me!" And I look to see if anyone is out there, and there's no one in my bathroom. I hear these weird noises coming from outside though, and as I look outside, I swear I see a deer staring at me from the edge of the woodline that's near my house. I don't know. All of this is just so random. It kinda sounds like a ghost encounter, but at the same time, I can't explain all the other weird things. Do you guys think this is a skinwalker messing with me? Have you guys ever heard of skinwalkers doing these kind of things? I'd love to know in the comments if you have any idea. I'll start off saying this was told to me secondhand by a friend. We'll call my best friend A for privacy reasons. Well, A and I live on the edge of our town in Wisconsin, in this little cul-de-sac surrounded by the woods. So it's not uncommon to see wild animals such as turkeys, deer, foxes, and especially coyotes. Last year, when she first spotted the coyote that seemed too big to be a coyote, she didn't think too much about it and assumed some old lady thought it was a dog and was just feeding it. Well, towards the end of winter this year, she saw it again. This time, similar to the last, she noticed something was off about this random coyote, and pegged it off as the large coyote she saw during the summer last year. So a bit of context behind A. She has a 2-year-old and is a smoker. She often goes outside to smoke. Most times she is alone. About a week ago or so, A was outside smoking while her mom watched her toddler. When she heard this clicking sound, like how one would summon a cat or a dog, well, A's toddler just recently learned how to make that sound, and had been making that sound fairly frequently. So her initial thought that her daughter was making that noise. But there was something really wrong about how it sounded. It didn't sound like her daughter. A said it almost sounded like someone was trying to mimic her daughter but could not do it quite right. A opened her front door to see if it was her kid, but when she looked in, her daughter was quietly watching TV. She closed the door, still looking in, and heard the sound again, but her daughter had not moved from the position she was already in.
A looked toward the tree line and saw nothing. She heard the noise again. She then looked towards the roof of her house and saw this weird fleshy thing that did not look like anything or any animal she had ever seen. It looked at her and then jumped to the tree next to A's house. This is when she said the panic really hit her. We recently had a bad storm that damaged that tree, and when the thing jumped on it, the tree had no branches and was very unstable. Even a bird would make it sway if it landed on it. So when she said she did not see it sway or hear a thud, she got terrified. A ran over to the tree and saw nothing, not even a shadow. She looked towards the tree line and did not see anything, but felt very uneasy. Since this incident, every time she goes outside alone at night, she feels eyes on her and an overall sense of unease. On a few occasions, she will hear bone-snapping crunches, like twigs snapping but louder and nastier, as well as a growling. A said everything about it just feels wrong. Keep in mind, this only happens when she is outside alone. Whatever it is targeting her. She also mentioned sometimes when she flashes a light towards the tree line, instead of the usual yellow eyes that shine back, they are white. A asked me to include that part, because she's pretty paranoid that what she saw could be a skinwalker. What do you guys think? Is it a skinwalker? Or something else? Does anybody have any advice for her? When I was younger, between the ages of 3 and 11 years old, I lived in a trailer with my stepdad, my mom, and my younger brother. We lived in a very small town in northern Minnesota. The town has less than 100 residents. The center of town was about a mile away, and down the street was about 6 to 7 houses. I lived in the middle one. On the left of our trailer was the front door, our playground, a strip of border trees, and a crop field. Corn, to be specific. On the right of our trailer was the back door. Its door handle was broken, and we didn't have the money to fix it at the time. This led into a fenced-in area for our dogs, then another border strip of trees, a daycare on the other side, and less than a half-mile down the road was a cemetery. To the front of our house was the road and cornfield. To the back was our house and our backyard, which was bordered by tall, thick weeds, an empty field, with a trail that led from our house to the woods, which was a little less than a half-mile from our house. At the time, we were very poor, which is why we could not fix a lot of things in our house, even if we needed them, like the back door. The layout of the trailer went like this. Towards the road and the front end was my room, the furthest from anyone, a small bathroom and a hallway, the front door, living room, kitchen and dining room, then a long hallway towards the back. On the left side of the hallway, more towards the back, was my brother's room, and right across from that was the back door. Then in the very back was my parents' room. My dad was pretty abusive to me, so in the middle of the night I would run away, which was more just sneaking out and hiding out under our front porch for probably an hour or two, and then sneaking back into my room. At one point when I had done it, my stepdad got mad, broke our porch light, and I couldn't see anything. I was 7 or 8 at the time. One night was so particularly bad, I left at like midnight or 1 a.m. and went under the porch. I was there maybe 30 minutes, then I tried to go back inside. Little did I know my stepdad was still mad and locked me out. At this point I was 9 years old, so I freaked out. I started crying at the door trying to get it open. All the lights were off inside, so it was almost pitch black outside, aside from the streetlight. I was still crying when I heard a sound coming from the woods. It sounded like crying. So I stopped, thinking it was echoing or something. But it never stopped. The crying sound did not sound like an animal or anything. It sounded like someone had recorded a person crying. Honestly, it kind of sounded like me. I panicked, fear tearing through me. I tried the door harder, but I couldn't get it to open. I'll just run to Mom's window, I had thought. As I was about to, the crying sounded closer than it did before. It was a continuous crying, but it was coming towards me. My face began to heat up and tears started to line my vision. Back door. The words popped into my head. The doorknob is broken, I can get in. I paused and listened to the crying. It still sounded closer to the woods than me, so I took my chance. I ran around the front of the house, paused before I reached the side, and then the crying stopped. This was my chance. It went away. Or so I thought. I booked it to the fence. The latch was stuck. I tried to push it up, and just as it started to slide up, there was a whisper from the tall border weeds no more than 15 feet away from where I was facing.
Come here. Come here. Come here.
The words became stretched out and honestly horrifying. It sounded like a very old, slow, distorted sound from an old handheld recorder. I pushed the fence gate open and slammed the latch back down, ran up our decaying steps, all 2 of them, and flung open the door. I slammed it shut and pushed a heavy box in front of it. I booked it down the hallway through the living room and right into my room. I closed my window quietly and let the blanket fall over it so nothing could see in. I turned off the lights and turned on a movie very softly and crawled into the top bunk and waited out the night. I could hear walking around the trailer and then crying. I wanted to scream at it, but I didn't want it to find me. When morning came, I told my mom about my stepdad locking me out, but not about what happened. She, of course, screamed at him and he apologized and said he thought I was inside. I knew he was lying because he did this constantly, honestly. But that's not the point of the story. I never really figured out what that creature was. I would often look out towards the field and hear what sounded like coyotes, but they would always sound distorted. Sometimes I'll see these interesting glowing red orbs that I'm pretty sure are eyes in the tree line. I honestly don't know what is living out in those woods, but I honestly don't think I care to. This story started off when I was 9 years old on a Cub Scout camping trip. Privacy reasons, I will not state the pack number or my name, but I will say this happened in Colorado. I believe what I saw was a Skinwalker at the time. I didn't know much about these things or what they were until I started listening to Swamp Dwellers videos, and I think I can say, confidently, that what I saw was a Skinwalker. About a year ago, myself and other scouts found a rocky area near a camping site that our pack would go to twice a year. So on the last day of this trip, I thought I knew the way to the rocky area. So I decided to tell the other scouts to go ahead for me while I filled up my canteen and grabbed a little thing of goldfish. And then I started on my way. About 10 or so minutes later, I was confused because I thought I had gone the right way. But it seems that I didn't because I couldn't find the rocky area. And as soon as I realized that I was lost, I got scared and started to tear up a little. After I realized this, I had also realized that the only thing I could hear was my breathing and crying. At the time, I didn't know what this meant, but I kept walking, trying to hopefully find my campsite or the rocky area to hopefully find the other scouts. I was walking around for a few more minutes, and I started crying after a little longer. Suddenly, I heard my mother's voice, but it was off, like coming through the radio or something. I didn't care. I called to it hoping to see my mom. Then, I smelt it. This smell was a cross of the spray of a skunk with rotting meat. The moment I smelt it, I ended up throwing up. I just couldn't hold it in. I looked up and then I saw it. It looked like a deer, but it was all wrong. It had legs of that of a human, but they were mangled. It almost made me want to retch again. When I made eye contact with this thing, it was like I was suddenly paralyzed. It had deep black eyes that were freezing me in place. It came closer and suddenly took the shape of a slumped over human being with a deer head and had the legs of what I think would be a wolf. Suddenly, 2 people came walking by calling my name, and this thing turned into an older looking man and sprinted off like the devil it was. It was so unnaturally fast. It didn't make a sound either. It was so unnatural. Honestly, I was so freaked out that I ran to the 2 voices, clutched to them, and never separated from my group for the rest of the trip. All these years later, I'm 16 now, and I still think, what happened? I have no idea if this was a Skinwalker, or a Wendigo or what, but from listening to the Swamp Dweller stories and reading some online, I think it might be a Skinwalker that we encountered that day in Colorado. Any opinions would be greatly appreciated.